All right, let's dive straight into this explainer. Today, we're exploring something really fascinating: why strictly sticking to the letter of the law can actually backfire, and how empathy is the true intended spirit behind any rule. We're going to unpack some really thought provoking source material that challenges how we view obedience, morality, and honestly, just how we treat the people around us. Because, we often think that simply following the rules automatically makes us a good person. But as we're going to see, reality is way more complex than just checking off boxes. To kick things off, I want to hook you with this incredibly bizarre historical quirk from British India. It perfectly illustrates the danger of having rules without any context. Just think about this for a second. How could a government policy that was specifically designed to eradicate a deadly pest accidentally end up creating thousands more of them? It's wild, but this historical event perfectly sets the stage for understanding why raw logic and rigid rules just kind of fall apart when they collide with human nature. So, let's look at Section 1, the Cobra Effect, and the unintended consequences in British India. Okay, here's how it went down. Back when the British ruled India, the city of Delhi had a massive problem with venomous cobras. So the government rolled out what seemed like a highly logical law. They offered a cash bounty for every dead snake. And initially, it worked. People hunted the snakes, and the cobra population dropped. But then, human ingenuity took over. To make a steady income, people literally started breeding cobras in their own homes. When the government finally realized they were being completely scammed by these makeshift snake breeding businesses, they just abruptly canceled the bounty. So, left with thousands of worthless, highly dangerous snakes, what do the breeders do? They just release them into the streets, ultimately making the cobra problem far, far worse than before the rule even existed. The really crucial point here is that not everyone who follows the rules is acting fairly. Just because something is legal doesn't inherently make it moral. The snake breeders in India didn't technically break the law while that bounty was active, right? They were just following the financial incentives provided by the rule. But their actions were completely devoid of the rule's original intent, which was public safety. And this brings up a massive divide that we navigate every single day of our lives: the gap between doing what is legally permissible and doing what is actually right. Which brings us to Section 2, letter versus spirit. Doing things right versus doing the right things. It is incredibly easy to use rules as a shield for poor behavior. We kind of convince ourselves that as long as we aren't crossing a hard red line, our conscience is perfectly clear. I mean, we can be completely compliant with the rules while totally lacking love and human decency. Think about it. You might not tell a direct lie, but you deliberately withhold the full truth to manipulate a situation. You might not commit murder, but you absolutely assassinate someone's character and dignity through gossip. You might be the perfect financial provider, paying every bill on time, yet you entirely ignore your spouse's emotional needs. Or maybe you obey all the household rules, but you ignore your parents. Or you pray regularly, yet you harbor this bitter, deep-seated grudge. In all of these cases, the letter of the law is kept perfectly, but the spirit of the law is utterly broken. Let's move into Section 3, mercy over sacrifice. A classic showdown between the Pharisees and the divine. The source material brings up this ancient yet incredibly relevant story that shows exactly what happens when people prioritize regulations over actual human suffering. The story goes like this. Jesus and his disciples were walking through a grain field. The disciples were completely exhausted and hungry, so they simply picked some heads of grain to eat. They didn't steal, they didn't hurt anyone, they didn't cause property damage. But when these hungry disciples picked grain to eat on a day of rest, the Pharisees, who were the strict religious leaders of the time, were absolutely furious. And not because anyone was hurt, but simply because a rigid regulation was broken. To them, picking grain was technically classified as harvesting, which was strictly forbidden on the Sabbath. There is just a stark, undeniable contrast between these two mindsets. The Pharisees were so blinded by their legalism that they looked at a starving person and only saw a rule breaker. They completely missed the human need standing right in front of them. The divine mindset, on the other hand, looks at the exact same situation, sees the hunger, and recognizes that the rules were meant to serve and protect humanity, not to oppress it. Jesus delivers this absolute mic drop of a response, proving that the true purpose of any law is to aid humanity and foster love. He quotes ancient scripture saying, "I desire mercy, not sacrifice." It is such a profound correction. He's essentially saying, look, God didn't give humanity rules just to make life difficult or to create this impossible checklist for perfection. The rules were given as a framework to help us love one another better. If your strict adherence to a rule is preventing you from showing mercy, well, you've entirely misunderstood the rule. That takes us to Section 4, the drowning child. What happens when rules and lectures fail? Because honestly, it's super easy to judge those Pharisees from thousands of years ago, right? But the hard truth is, we often exhibit the exact same behavior in our modern relationships without even realizing it. The source provides this incredibly vivid scenario. Imagine a child is playing carelessly by the edge of a fast-moving river and suddenly falls in. They're splashing, they're swallowing water, they're desperately crying out for help. Now imagine a teacher walking by and, instead of offering a hand, starts scolding the sinking child for breaking the rules. The teacher just stands on the bank yelling, "See, I told you not to play there, you broke the safety rules." It sounds completely absurd, right? It sounds incredibly cruel, but we do this to each other all the time. The absolute core takeaway from this explainer is this. When people are drowning in their problems, they need an outstretched hand of compassion. They do not need a critic pointing out their mistakes. When someone is hurt or crying, you don't start by analyzing where they went wrong. You heal before you lecture. You comfort before you correct. You save before you scold. Now, it's not wrong to give advice or point out a misstep, but there is a time and a place for it. When someone is in the thick of a crisis, your immediate baseline response must be mercy. And that brings us to our final section, Section 5, the most loving thing, the ultimate metric for our actions. So sometimes showing mercy and love isn't just about giving people exactly what they ask for. It actually requires a lot of wisdom, healthy boundaries, and a deep understanding of what will truly help them in the long run. For example, how do you handle a friend or a relative who constantly borrows money? The source material raises this very common, very relatable dilemma. A friend comes to you, they're struggling, they're asking for another loan, you feel bad for them. You want to follow the rule of being a generous, good person. But if they keep coming back and their situation never actually improves, is giving them more money really an act of love? It's literally like overwatering a flower. Water is objectively good for a plant, obviously. But if you drown it in water every single day, the roots rot and the flower dies. In the exact same way, if you blindly enable someone's poor choices without ever allowing them to learn responsibility, you aren't actually showing them true mercy. You are accidentally destroying something by giving it way too much of a good thing. We really need to shift our entire paradigm away from just checking the boxes of what is technically right and start asking what is actually the most loving thing to do for that person's soul. When we're faced with a hard decision, our default is almost always to ask, well, is this right? But as we saw with the Cobra effect earlier, what is technically right or strictly logical can sometimes cause massive harm. By changing our internal compass to ask, is this the most loving thing? We elevate our entire perspective. Sometimes the most loving thing is to dive in and pull them out of the river, but other times the most loving thing is to say no, so they can finally learn to stand on their own 2 feet. The source references this fantastic, famous quote by St. Augustine that just captures this perfectly. Love and do what you want. If your actions are genuinely rooted in a deep, empathetic love, you will rarely stray far from doing what is truly right. Now, this isn't some free pass for chaos. It's a really profound truth about human nature. When your absolute core motivation is genuine care for the well-being of another person, you don't need a massive rule book to tell you how to act. Love just naturally becomes its own perfect compass. I want you to take a second and reflect on your own daily interactions. When someone stumbles, are you a judge or are you a healer? When you see someone fail at work or a family member make a really poor life choice, what is your very first instinct? Is it to mentally catalog their mistakes so you can feel a little superior? Or is it to figure out how you can help them recover? The world is absolutely full of people ready to explain exactly why you fell, but it is starved for people willing to help you stand back up. Because, honestly, it is incredibly easy to point out flaws and be technically right, but it takes tremendous courage and strength to actually be good. Any amateur can be a critic, right? Any Pharisee can memorize a rulebook and point fingers. But to actually listen, to forgive, and to love people who might not even deserve it in that moment, that requires a strength of character that completely transcends any written law. So, we'll leave you with this final lingering thought to evaluate which path you're walking on. Who are you most like? The Pharisee or the Lord? What the world desperately needs right now are fewer judges and far, far more hearts willing to understand. As you navigate your week, your relationships, and your own challenges, just remember that the spirit of the law is always, always mercy. Thank you so much for exploring this with me today. Keep asking the right questions and let